because the thing is, you don't want to maintain your patch forever. You want it to get it into that code base, and then it's someone else's problem, isn't it?
Hello and welcome to OffScript. Today we're going to be talking about React Native. Hey Rio, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good. So today we're going to talk about React Native and how you kind of got to know about it, use cases and all that sort of stuff that makes it interesting to you.
Yeah, so as you know, we're a digital agency / consultancy, and a lot of what we do is taking clients' ideas and business problems and turning them into applications.
Yeah.
And a lot of that tends to be quite iterative, so they've got a formation of an idea and they want to see if it works and change it quite rapidly.
Yeah. So
when we're doing that, we might want to build out like a web backend, a bit of an admin panel, and then start iterating on a mobile app as well. And React Native was sort of the obvious choice because it allowed us to quickly get something up and running and iterate on the UI. And the more and more that we use it, the more that we fall in love with it, because it does really give you a very rapid way to develop apps. So we've got a internal pipeline which you can commit some code and you can get it into someone's hands in a couple of minutes, and it'll actually just push the diff to the app. And yeah, I think it's just been a really good choice. And a lot of people think, oh, are you using JavaScript or TypeScript? It's going to be slower, but actually the performance is really good. And yeah, you've seen lots of major apps use it, especially in that sort of early stage. Yeah,
so I think because React Native has not been it's not new. It's been around for a while now. Obviously, it's a more mature framework, if you will. So I think people might be asking, why are we talking about this now? I think because it has stood the test of time. It has shown that it can be used in quite significant sized apps, so for quite complex apps, and I think a lot of the reasons that you like using it are probably the same reasons a lot of people do, which is the reuse, the consistency, the skills that revolve around using that tool chain.
Yep.
So I guess firstly, how did you get to know about it then? So obviously React, very popular front-end framework.
Yeah, so we were playing around with it in the early days when Facebook first released it. It was quite clunky back then.
Yeah.
More difficult. Obviously the Xcode, like the native app building experience in Xcode is lovely.
Yeah.
Like it's really nice. The Apple ecosystem's great.
Yeah.
Except for Cocoa Pods, which is a bit of a weird oddity where you have this Ruby package manager to manage your Objective-C Swift dependencies. But apart from that, the ecosystem's really nice. So you wouldn't want to throw that all away for good reason. And the good reason is, unfortunately, clients need multi-platform.
Yeah.
So you need to build an Android app anyway.
Yeah.
And do you want to do that in Kotlin or Java? Sometimes you do, but I'd argue that would at least double the cost.
I think it's hard to ignore as well. So for an agency of your size, which is 45 people, 50?
Yeah, we're going to be pushing 60 soon.
Oh wow, yeah. I'm a bit behind. But whilst it is a significant sized agency, you don't want to have internal shops for those different disciplines. Maybe if this is the route you want to take.
Yeah. So the good thing about React Native is that you can use native UI. Everything is native UI. So the actual structure of components is calculated, and then there's a real native process which renders proper native UI. So you can have a native Android drop down or a native iOS drop down, and there are libraries that abstract the differences away, which, as you know, leaky abstraction, all that. Sometimes you have to dive in and bespoke it slightly for each platform. But you can also go all the way down. So what I wouldn't recommend is using Expo for a client app, just because you don't get the full flexibility to sort of dive in and change stuff underneath if you have to.
Right, so that's where I think earlier on in the React kind of ecosystem, in the React Native ecosystem, there was definitely some challenges where people felt like they were down a dead end. They didn't have any get out of jail free cards in terms of breaking into the kind of OS specific areas, right?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, if you have a crasher or some issue which is in the native land, you do need to understand all the way down. That's true of any tech.
Yeah.
So eventually you'll need a Java dev or an Objective-C dev to be able to unpick bits. But once they've done that, the rest of the team can move really quickly.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like the benefits sometimes outweigh the kind of the negatives. So, back in the day, don't you remember CoffeeScript when that first came out? It's hugely popular, but ultimately you still have to dig into the source tree or the stack traces of JS because, and sadly it wasn't that easy to understand. But this is the thing, some of these abstractions might buy you time or maintainability or other things like that, but ultimately you still need to interact with the underlying code base, right?
Yeah, so you still need to be debugging all the way down if you need to. But the good thing is that the standard debugging tools will work. You just have to do a bit more digging because something might be happening in JavaScript land and then it's knocking over the incorrect thing across the bridge and then the crash happens there. But the tooling's getting a load better, and you can add things like Bugsnag and give it your source maps and also give it the dynamic library name stuff, so it knows exactly the function names that it crashes in the native land as well. But you can do anything, and there are ways to improve and fix things that you don't have control over as well. So there's a utility called patch package, which when I describe it to you, you'll think that it's awful. But loads of, I've had other agencies give us their React Native code bases, and a lot of them have this, have these workarounds in. But effectively what it does is you can change a native module and it'll apply that patch when you run yarn install or npm install. And it makes it easy to add 1 or 2 line tweaks to fix a problem.
So, in the way that I'd compute that is it's similar to kind of C extensions in Ruby or something like that in terms of patching part of the runtime or something like that? Or
yeah, so say you had a library that was doing some sort of native menu and you know that this one line of native code would improve the performance or change something about it. You can do that, and often you'll find people posting those fixes in threads and stuff like that, and you can just apply that. And it means that you get the security and improvement updates without forking the package. When you run the command, it actually pre-fills a pull request for you. So if it's something that's of interest to the author of the package, you can open a pull request, which we as Parallax try and do. We try and contribute back. And it just simplifies that flow. So instead of forking it, changing the one line depending on that forked package and then it going stale, you've all seen that sort of problem. You come back to the project 6 months later and that package has moved on loads, and then you need to unpick it again and get it up to date and all the rest of it.
Nice.
But yeah, I would recommend checking that out to sort of smooth over any issues. But it does help you move really, really quickly. And there's a sort of standard set of libraries that we as Parallax try and use on new React Native builds. And one of those is Lotte. You might have heard this from Airbnb.
I haven't actually.
So it's an animation library, and it has native iOS and Android players. But in After Effects, you can obviously animate loads of nice vector stuff, and it'll output to JSON using a plugin called Body Moving. So this is kind of like all the advantages. Think about Flash movies back in the day.
It sounds a bit like GSAP for kind of native environments, essentially.
Yeah, that's it. So you can make an animation really nice in proper tooling. Export is really compact JSON, and then play it at full whack frame rate. So instead of embedding like a video into your app for an intro animation or something like that, you can just have a really tiny bit of JSON.
That's really cool.
And it looks really slick as well.
So we'll dig a bit more into some of this tooling in a second, but I just want to kind of step back a little bit. So we've kind of talked about why you choose React Native over separate OS-specific builds, in terms of speed to prototype, in terms of skill, I guess skill availability in the team, parity between building web apps and things like that in React already.
Yeah.
But what's the experience like as a developer? So, I'm starting a brand new React Native project. How is this different to something like Xcode or using, Kotlin or something like that?
Yes.
What's the difference?
So you get one slow build, which is your main Xcode build or your Gradle build for Android, and then you get hot reloading straight out the box these days. So your experience is change something in VS Code, press save, and it immediately updates in the simulator. And
is that using the Xcode Simulator?
Yes, yeah. It uses the standard simulators.
Yeah.
For Android, I prefer using a real device.
Right.
Because the emulator is a bit slow.
Right.
But that's not a React Native issue. That's just the Android ecosystem issue. But yeah, real device is always nice, and you can hot reload directly onto real device that's plugged in.
So how does that work with? So Apple famously with the App Store, they're quite restrictive in terms of what they allow to be released.
Yeah.
How does that work with them then? Because surely they would have concerns around you updating significant parts of the app without their knowledge or approval.
Yeah. So there's two things. There's hot reload is dev only, so that's just for while you're coding.
Yeah.
And then there are tools where you can change the code of the app at runtime when it's in production, effectively.
Right.
The terms of service are clear that you shouldn't be changing any major functionality. There's a page on one of Microsoft's sites where they highlight a specific bit, but you can have bug fixes and improvements shipped through that means.
Right.
We just had an app approved yesterday with that technology embedded in already, and they're aware of it.
Nice. So
it's totally allowed. Microsoft do it with a bunch of their apps. The main advantage of that is, so let's say you find a real bad bug in the app. It's only come to light after you've gone live. What you'd usually do is build a new version of the app, submit to Apple, hopes that they're on standby and they're not having a bad week.
Yeah.
Because it's up to them how long it takes for them to review it.
Yeah, which doesn't tie into your release time. That's right.
Sometimes the terms of use changes and their guidelines change, so they might add a new requirement like, oh, we now need you to add this checkbox or this permission, or you need to change something, which is all really good stuff. But when you're doing a hotfix, it's quite stressful.
Yeah.
So being able to sort of push directly is really useful. Android land, I don't think they care what you do.
No.
The Google Play approval process is sometimes a little bit painful, but they're not as pedantic, I don't think.
Right.
They might be slow, but they won't nitpick.
Right. Okay.
Whereas Apple are like, you need to have a button which automatically deletes their account if you can sign up within the app and things like that, which is good stuff for the consumer.
Yeah, it's just effort for the developer.
Yeah, and you don't want to be caught out because they keep shifting the dates. Give people a bit more time, and then suddenly you're caught out because there's new changes in. So you need to really keep an eye on the news. And
that's the pros and cons of a walled garden, I guess, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean, you know me, I love a web app, but the native side is just a whole different ball game, really, in terms of being able to release when you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, so I'm sitting there. I've done my initial build in Xcode or whatever else for Android, and I've got it sitting there in the simulator on a device, and I'm then using my own editor, VS Code, whatever you use for your day-to-day React work. Yeah. And I'm just like a normal project. I'm just interacting just like I was building a React app, or
that's right. So you'd have an app.js as your entry point, and then you use a library like React Navigation, which has native navigation. So on Android, it'll feel differently. You can use the hardware back button.
Yeah.
On iOS, it'll be like you can do like the modals that iOS has and all that kind of nice stuff that you get for free with native dev. Isn't that hard with React Native either?
Nice.
And the only time you need to do a full rebuild is when you add a native dependency.
Right. Okay.
So it makes it really, really quick to sort of iterate.
So the packages you use in React Native land assume that the actual build has the dependencies in there as well.
Yeah, that's right. So you need to bump your version number every time you add a new native dependency.
Got you.
But there's a load of nice libraries. Reanimated 2 is really popular, and that's an animation library, but it actually offloads a lot of the heavy lifting to the native thread.
Yeah.
So instead of it happening in JS land, it happens native land, and it makes it feel loads smoother.
That's pretty cool.
And you can do hardware acceleration and all that kind of stuff.
Well, especially with the devices themselves shipping with much more powerful capabilities on the GPU and so on, that must be pretty exciting.
And there is a Twitter thread which argues that a well-built React Native app can be quicker in some circumstances than a well-built Android app because of the way that the threading works.
Right.
Because a load of calculation happens off thread and then it pushes differentials. You have to do a lot of work to make it as quick. There are still some performance issues which you need to be aware of. I think I can't remember if it's Shopify or someone. They've just released an Android specific flat list which is way more performant.
Right. That's cool.
But yeah, you just need to keep an eye on what you're actually sending to over the native bridge, and if you do it correctly and you have all the right sort of asynchronous loading and like infinite scroll stuff set up correctly, you're not rendering tons of stuff at once. You're only rendering the stuff that's visible.
And so in that example where you've got an area you might need to dip into more of the native code where you have performance issues or something like that, how would you go about breaking into that from VS Code? So I've got an infinite list. I'm using the bridge, as you said, to try and implement the components the way I want to, but it's not quite working.
Yeah.
What are your options there then?
So my process tends to be, if it's something really difficult, I like to have a clean environment to work on it.
Yeah.
So I might just check out the repo of the dependency standalone and look at their examples and try and reproduce the issue there, and then just hack on their code base and use their contributor guidelines to produce the fix in Java, Kotlin, Objective-C, Swift, whatever it's in. Then once I've got it working, I'll copy that across to the main project, run the patch package function, and then we've got our working patch.
So you'll implement a fix in isolation and then contribute to the upstream project, basically.
Yeah. So with React Native Web View, we've got a patch open for adding menu items to the context menu,
right?
Which, because they haven't got feature parity between iOS and Android, so we thought, fuck it, we'll just add it.
Yeah.
Because it should be there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Nice.
So the minute it's patch packaged into our project, but after more conversations happen on that PR, we're hoping that it'll get merged, and then we'll use the official one.
Right.
Because the thing is, you don't want to maintain your patch forever. You want it to get it into that code base, and then it's someone else's problem, isn't it?
Well, also it's it's the kind of ethos of open source, which is if you need it, others might as well, and if it's in line with the project.
I guess you've got to remember that package maintainers are busy, and they might not want your patch, and they might not want the cost of maintaining it forever either.
Yeah.
But other users might find it useful, so eventually maybe you could fork it if it was never going to go in. Or
well, that's when you see people creating kind of secondary libraries off things like that kind of fit more of a specific use case, don't you? So
yeah, that's it.
So you mentioned a few of the animation libraries and stuff. Do you also have the ability to plug into the different haptic engines and the devices and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, there's a nice haptic library that we use called React Native Haptic Feedback, and you can add in the success, error, vibrations, things that you don't actually really notice when you're using your phone.
But when it's not there,
when it's not there, it feels flat.
Yeah.
So like on this app we're building at the moment, we're building a web browser, and you change tabs and you get like a like a knock sort of feel, and it feels really nice, like it's clunking into place.
Yeah. And
it matches the animation, and that kind of feeling goes a long way to let the user know that something's happened. And you can have like an error rumble and things like that, and it's
cool.
Slightly different patterns that you want on Android. They're used to slightly different vibrations, but it's best to try and match what platform
try and
users
fit
like.
into the norm.
Yeah, that's it. You don't want to make something that looks like an iOS app that runs on Android.
So with that, if there are customizations you want to do for each platform, how is it? Just if statements everywhere when you're trying to fork this sort of stuff? How does it work?
There's a platform class, and you can just add a switch. So it can either output iOS or Android or Windows even, but you can add like a little switch thing in.
Right. Great.
And it looks fairly tidy. Often it'll be things like on iOS you'll want to use their inbuilt icons,
right? And
on Android you'll want to use material icons.
Yeah.
Just little things like that.
And in terms of that, I guess it's just how you structure your code. In terms of it might be a switch, but you might be able to package things up in separate functions, or however you want to do that. Some
people do. They'll have a class with a .ios and .android.
I see.
And then it'll automatically switch between those.
That's quite a nice way of encapsulating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But yeah, you just got to keep playing and making sure you're fitting in with what users expect.
And in terms of the kind of the rest of the ecosystem, so things like making requests to web services and things like that. Inside of React, do you use some of the libraries that we're used to using already in React?
Yeah, so React Query is really good. I think they've just renamed actually.
Right.
React Query and Axios.
Yeah, because Axios is was the underlying HTTP. I've got a mind blank there.
Yeah, it's like a HTTP.
I was about to. I took a trip to the past. Then I was about to say the full name for the Ajax. I don't know where that came from.
XML HTTP request.
I had a brain fart then. I don't know what happened.
No, Axios is really good. Fetch is good, but Axios I prefer because it's consistent and you can got a concept of interceptors.
Yeah,
which are really good when you get unauthorized responses. You could just have a blanket. Oh well, if we're getting unauthorized on this request, probably want to log them out.
Yeah,
or at least make the app know that they're logged out.
Yeah. So the nice thing about that is you can consistently handle. So as you said, like change state or show modals for errors and things like that, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I think I'd definitely recommend Axios and React Query. React Query is really good for like the caching element. And then there's a library, a plugin, for Flipper. So Flipper is how you debug a React Native app.
Right.
It's like a desktop app. It has network login there. It's got various login. You can inspect the layout, so you can like sort of hover over different things and it'll highlight.
That's pretty cool.
You can change accessibility text and other elements to play around with it.
Right.
Kind of like Chrome Inspector for apps.
That's cool.
Which is really useful. But yeah, they've got a Flipper plugin, and then you can see why it's been cached, what the cache key is. And
I think tooling like that goes to show how far some of the ecosystems come. I know in the early days it was quite difficult to understand what that React Native bridge was doing and how it was actually functioning when it made it into the wild. These are really killer and key features for that developer experience that really wasn't there previously, I think. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. There was very much a sort of console log everything sort of feeling to it early on. And Flipper and the new error messages are so good. So you get, if it's fatal, you get a full screen takeover, but they've redesigned it all, and you get a stack trace.
Right.
And you can tap on the stack trace in your app and it'll open in your IDE on your machine.
Amazing. So does that use like source maps somehow, or that? How's that?
Yeah, using source maps, and obviously there's a when you run yarn start on your desktop, there's the connection between the two, and it must just pass it up and go.
That's cool.
Right, open VS Code to that specific line as well.
That's really cool.
And it's just like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah, that's it's the sort of stuff that I think we're now very used to in modern development environments. When you're trying to build something like this, when it's not there, you really feel the pain.
Yeah, definitely. The most important thing with any kind of development is to sort of shorten the feedback loop. So if you can go from error to the line of code to changing it to seeing the result of it in 20 seconds, then you're back in sort of web development vibes again. which
is good, because especially with an agency like Parallax, you've got a team that are maybe predominantly working in React anyway. it's quite nice to know that they would have the experience, the same experience if they're working in app or web app, and it's quite nice for you to know that you have the skills to distribute people onto whatever projects need it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that code reuse thing as well. Like you can take some of those classes and reuse them for web stuff as well. Although we haven't gone full. There's a package called React Native Web which Twitter uses. We haven't done that,
right?
But that basically renders the native UI as a web view, which is nuts.
Oh right, yeah, I have read about that actually.
We haven't done that yet, but it's in theory it's an option.
Yeah,
but you almost want to do the web stuff as the web stuff and not complicate it with other stuff. But yeah, you definitely reuse some classes.
I mean, you're probably only saying that because you see web as the purer platform, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But there are reasons you would have an app, and it's access to hardware, location-based data, 3D face scanning, like obviously the haptic feedback stuff. I don't think you can do in the web platform yet, although they'll probably add it in with an allow box at some point.
I think there's definitely part of the web API where you can interact with those parts of the device, isn't there?
Yeah.
But I guess it'd be, yeah. So I'm just thinking in terms of, what apps are there that we would not expect them to be built in something like React Native? So, as you said, Twitter's kind of done the opposite there.
Yeah. I believe large parts of the Twitter app are still React Native, but there is a lot of native stuff in there. Discord is full React Native, which is really nice.
Oh, wow.
Shopify's app where you can see deliveries that are on the way.
Yeah.
That's React Native. That's quite an early React Native. Pinterest, Tesla app, which is really slick.
Has Pinterest always been React Native?
No,
because I remember early on they did some really slick native animations on iOS specifically, but then they ported them out. But do you remember the early app? It was very springy, wasn't it? It was very springy app, animations everywhere. And
like that was skeuomorphic days as well, wasn't it? It probably had loads of like leather effects.
I'm sure there's loads of stitch work everywhere. Yeah,
that was a really strange time, wasn't it?
It was you look at that now and you think that looks batshit.
But yeah, I think eventually large teams would look at iterating quickly with React Native and then start swapping it out with native to get even closer to where they want it to go. But for certain budgets and team shapes, I just can't justify burning through that with two separate teams.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? At the end of the day, particularly with, we were speaking about this earlier on, and we were saying, for some use cases, React Native doesn't make sense because you will want maybe not a native experience, because you can achieve that with React Native, but you want to make sure you go down the specific route from the start. So a good example of this was Monzo. We talked about Monzo.
Yeah.
And they always needed multi-device, multi-platform, sorry. But they also probably had the team structure and the desire to go down the very specific platform route.
Yeah.
For a while, the Android app was lagging behind a bit, which I'm sure they felt some pain on. I wonder if they would, given the opportunity now to do it again, if they'd start with React Native. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. Although if they're really invested in those code bases, probably not. But
no, and I think that if you've got specific teams that definitely want to work directly with those platforms, and I think the key point from our conversation earlier was exactly what you want to build.
Yeah. Well, for example, a video game would be a really bad idea to build in React Native because there's no native UI requirements. You can build it in a game engine and compile it to whatever.
Yeah.
Like you could build that in Unity or Unreal Engine or whatever you want.
Yeah.
But don't pick a web technology.
No. To build games.
No. Because you need to be closer to the GPU than that.
Yeah.
But for stuff that's got like scroll views, it's got some light animation, it's got like CRUD, it's got native menus and things like that.
That's a web app.
Totally. That's a web app. But you can totally do it in React Native if you needed access to the native stuff as well. And it feels a lot different to a web app. Like I can't really explain it without showing. But like when you pull down you get that sort of little vibrate and then the spinner and then it snaps back up. That's subtly different on both platforms. So on Android, sometimes you get a bit of a stretch when you get to the top of a thing, which I hate. It sort of stretches the content a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you've got the bouncing effect on iOS, and those little touches, they all add up.
Yeah.
And when they go away, when you're just a web view, the user's there like thinking, I just feel that this app isn't right.
Feels clunky, doesn't it?
Yeah. This is why Cordova and PhoneGap has sort of not died a death. It's still very much got an active community. And if you were an enterprise and you didn't give a hoot about how it looked and you just want something quick, PhoneGap, go for it. But it's not where I want to be.
I think the tricky thing is, though, sometimes, a lot of the time, you end up in a halfway house where you're trying to recreate those native interactions and it doesn't work. You're trying to get, like, on a list that you're pulling down, you're trying to get the right level of springiness that iOS achieves.
And like Ionic goes a long way to do that, don't they? They've got they have an Angular thing, and then I think now.
But you don't want to spend your life recreating that springy feeling.
No.
It's just not a good use of your time.
No.
Yeah.
And it never feels right.
No. And the problem is that Apple or whoever, Android, they'll be tweaking it all the time, and it will change over time, and trying to keep up with that.
If they change their native UI and it doesn't feel the same anymore, then
and then you've got horrible forks for different versions of OSs and all sorts.
Yeah, not the one.
What else have we missed? I think we've kind of covered quite a lot of the different approaches, but
so I think a really important thing with native is instantly showing something all the time, making it feel very, very responsive, even if you don't have the data yet. And this is important with web apps today as well. Because you're getting more sort of single page web applications, and users might not necessarily know when you're loading or not because it's not a full page reload. But skeleton loading is very important. There's an amazing thing called React Content Loader, and they have like a demo website where you can upload like placeholder SVG, and then it'll make that sort of shimmery effect.
Nice.
But you can just wrap it around standard React Native UI elements, and it'll guess what placeholder should look like.
All right.
So if it's bits of text, it'll do a bit of text, and if it's an image, it'll do a block. And then
that's cool.
It'll just go, something like that. So at the very minimum, do that. But ideally, get your designer, your local friendly designer, to knock something up nice, drag it into there, and then you get your nice shimmery.
That's nice. Whoosh, whoosh. And how does that work with scaling different aspect ratios and things like that?
So it'll match the layout of the things that you're in, so you can split them up into different sections.
Nice.
So if you've got a list view, the list view will flex to the width usually, and it'll match whatever's going on there.
Nice. That's cool.
It's good.
So you can still enforce a lot of the things that we've been working really hard to build in Webland in all these different environments as well.
So when Facebook started building React Native, they really liked Flexbox. So they basically reverse engineered Flexbox in the browser, and there's a blog post about how they made it, but they basically just rewrote it from scratch.
Right.
And then they've since ported that to native code. And that's one of your key dependencies is a native Flexbox implementation for iOS and Android, which does all the magic stuff.
It's crazy.
It's pretty nuts.
With the spec that is still, the spec is pretty much nailed on, isn't it? But with it still being relatively new, and I know they're learning a lot about the uses of it. It's quite interesting, though, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's really nice, and the way that different libraries interact and the way you can quickly knock layout together is really good.
Nice.
And then, we sort of use this on the web as well, but state management. So I know everyone's really keen on like Redux and stuff. I think it's way overcomplicated. So we use Zustand, which is amazing. It's all the advantages of Redux, and you can still use a Redux style syntax if you want.
Right.
But you've just got this really simple way that you can have a slice of data that you want to transform, and then the state propagates throughout. And
does it still use stuff like reducers and everything to augment that, or?
So you can just sort of set a state, and then if your component relies on that particular, you pull out one element of it, and if that changes, your component updates.
Oh, okay.
And you can also do like a shallow map. So you only care if a certain part of an object changes or the order of some objects change.
Right.
So you're not necessarily re-rendering everything all the time.
That's great.
It just does the right amount. So yeah.
And is the stand is a React Native specific state manager?
That'll work on the web as well.
Brilliant.
But their tagline is bare necessities for state management, and they've got a little bear logo. I'm
absolutely sold.
Checking it out, because it just makes your life so much easier. It's like you start using it and you're like, why the fuck wasn't I using this before? It's one of those libraries where you show a dev it and they're like, shit. So yeah, I would definitely recommend, even if you're not building React Native apps and you found this whole podcast episode completely pointless, at least you've taken that state management library away from it.
Go look at the stand. Brilliant. Anything else that we need to know?
No, I think just have a play. Just don't use Expo if you're going to publish it. Eject from Expo immediately. That'd be my only advice. But yeah, no, go for it. Have a play around. It's really cool.
I think, as someone that's not really used React Native much at all, I definitely want to have more of a play after this chat. I'm certainly really interested in that developer experience and how the kind of crossover works with that web development. So, we've not really got onto the points here, but how you use shared design systems and things like that. I imagine there's some huge wins in that area, as well as relying on the native interactions, right? So
yeah, that's it. I mean, you can use things like Native Base, which is a component library with sort of Tailwind-like classes and design tokens, which are very in at the moment.
Yeah.
And you can make a theme file, so you have a suite of colors that you can reuse. Just good practices that you can do that apply to native apps as well.
Awesome. I'm going to go and rebuild my site in React Native. But yeah, cool. Thanks very much, then, Maria. That was a really interesting run through React Native.
No worries. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you've been listening to Off Script with me, Josh Nesbitt, and James Hall. Join us next time as we discuss our next topic, and don't forget to subscribe.